Hello, I'm Sharon Tong and welcome to today's session of In Parliament. The recent haze problem and the Media Development Authority's licensing framework for news websites dominated the proceedings. Starting first with the haze issue, the government has put in place national systems across various ministries to manage future incidents of haze. Law and Foreign Affairs Minister K. Shanmugam says extraterritorial legislation is being considered by the Attorney General to tackle the recurrent problem. He has asked the Attorney General to study the possibility of introducing legislation and consider what legal options are available if credible and usable evidence shows Singapore-linked companies are involved. But he stressed the primary responsibility for taking action against companies still lies with Indonesia.
We also welcome President Yudhoyono's assurance that action will be taken against errant plantation companies, whether based in Indonesia, Singapore, or Malaysia, or elsewhere. As for whether Singapore-linked companies are involved, we have formally sought clarification through a diplomatic note and have requested that Indonesia provide any evidence of wrongdoing that Indonesia has. We are awaiting Indonesia's response.
Mr. Shanmugam also shared that Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia have agreed to establish a trilateral cooperative process. This is to look at ways to strengthen joint efforts to tackle the smoke haze. It will involve officials and experts from foreign ministries and related agencies of the three countries. This will complement existing platforms like the Sub-Regional Ministerial Steering Committee on Transboundary Haze Pollution. Mr. Shanmugam also responded to questions on the likelihood that Indonesia will ratify the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution.
The Indonesian government has told us that it will be submitting this agreement to the Indonesian House of Representatives for ratification soon. However, we also know that some Indonesian legislators feel that Indonesia does not benefit from the agreement. Indeed, this is the second time that the Indonesian government will be submitting the agreement to the DPR. We hope that Indonesia will expedite the ratification of the agreement.
Mr. Shanmugam also stressed that Singapore should focus on cooperation and persuading its neighbours to work together to put in place a long-term solution and the importance of keeping relationships friendly and taking a constructive approach to sort out issues. He added Singapore will regularly review the options available to mitigate and resolve the haze problem.
Exerting pressure would change relationships between countries and move them from being friendly to either cool and correct or unfriendly. We are linked on so many levels that when one country exerts pressure on one issue, both sides will feel the impact on the overall relationship. This holds true for all our bilateral relationships. It does not mean that we will not do anything, no matter how severe the impact is on us. But we must maintain a clear, long-term perspective of the bilateral relationship and do our utmost to avoid hurting this relationship as much as possible.
MP for Tampines GRC Irene Ng asked if there have been any steps agreed on by ASEAN to tackle the fires in Indonesia and if there's a timeline for implementation. But Mr. Shanmugam stressed that while Singapore will consider all options, it will also depend on the analysis of overall relationships with other countries concerned.
This has become a regional problem. Can I ask the Minister whether a regional solution is in sight? And if an effective one?
What has been done at the last ASEAN ministerial meeting is that all countries, not just Indonesia, have been asked to take steps to deal with this problem and, quite crucially, report to the leaders on what steps have been taken. I do make a distinction between statements of such a nature, which require countries to come up and explain what they've done, and actual steps on the ground. And I've pointed out to you what the limitations there are, because every country is sovereign. There is no point us saying to our people that some things can be done on the ground in another country when we are not in a position to ensure that. So we need to be clear about what we can and cannot do.
MP for Aljunied GRC Lui Tuck Yew also asked about Singapore's approach in dealing with Indonesia.
At the previous haze, Singapore brought the issue of the haze to United Nations. That would be seen, I suppose, as exerting pressure on Indonesia. This time around, I suppose that has not been an option because the minister said we don't want to exert pressure on Indonesia. So what has changed between then and now?
I didn't say that raising it at the United Nations is not an option. I've expressly said that we have not ruled anything out, nor have we ruled anything in. What we want to avoid is creating a situation where, for political reasons, parties or people within Indonesia then take a position to say, Singapore is threatening us, and therefore we must react, and therefore we must not do what they ask. I think we can very quickly get into those sorts of dynamics. International relations have to be handled delicately. Singaporeans' interests are primary. We will take that as our primary goal.
Chairman of the Haze Inter-Ministerial Committee, Dr. Png Eng Huat, said he is satisfied with the basic framework put in place to tackle the haze, as it is sound and comprehensive. This has resulted in a more robust whole-of-government organizational structures and response plans. For one, he said the Interagency Haze Task Force was formed to protect public health and safety and to work with Indonesia to mitigate the haze. Some 200,000 N95 masks were also given to low-income households. Those who visited polyclinics or GPs because they were affected also received subsidies. Meanwhile, the Social and Family Development Ministry has set up a fund to help childcare centres install air conditioner units. Dr. Eng, who is also Defence Minister, believes Singapore can withstand an even more severe national threat only if citizens maintain care and trust among one another.
Our collective response during this haze, where Singaporeans came together, trusted and cared for each other, adds to my confidence. More importantly, we should ask, are Singaporeans themselves confident of getting through emergencies? Because that's what counts. In this haze episode, around 80% of residents polled said that they were confident that Singapore will get through the haze and that Singapore is doing its best, that the government is doing its best to tackle the haze.
Dr. Eng said Singaporeans showed community resilience during the haze, where 84% said they were confident Singapore will get through this haze.
There was a group of IT-savvy Singaporeans who created a crowdsourcing site to help people find N95 masks. They were thinking that the run could continue for a few days, so why don't you have a crowdsourcing app so that you know where to get it? Obviously, we stopped the run, but nonetheless, they went on to produce apps to provide up-to-date, easy-to-understand information on the PSI reading. Nobody told all these groups to do this, but they saw the need and spontaneously stepped up to help.
Dr. Eng added that the Inter-Ministerial Committee's focus was also to protect public health and safety, and he commended the SAF and People's Association for their work.
Let me record that the People's Association Grassroots Network proved crucial and invaluable. The SAF could bring the mask to the constituencies, but whether you had the database, whether you had natural links that are formed, whether the grassroots leaders knew who the vulnerable and the poor, how to distribute them, we were very fortunate, in effect dependent on the PA Grassroots Network to be able to do this on such a large scale.
Environment Minister Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan says Singapore will improve the precision of its haze forecast over the next 1 to 2 years. This includes making use of finer resolution satellite imageries and installing more meteorological sensors to allow real-time monitoring. Singapore will also make a stronger push for concrete action and clear deliverables when the Sub-Regional Ministerial Steering Committee on Transboundary Haze Pollution meets next week. Singapore will urgently ask for countries to provide official and accurate concession maps. Such maps will help in monitoring hotspots in order to hold plantation and land companies accountable for their land clearing practices. Countries should also agree to a date for the public launch of the ASEAN Sub-Regional Haze Monitoring System platform that enables the identification of errant companies. Singapore also hopes Indonesia commits to ratify the ASEAN Transboundary Haze Pollution Agreement expeditiously and agree to renew its collaboration with Singapore at Jambi and other provinces. But legislation aside, Dr. Balakrishnan says consumers too have the power to influence the behaviour of companies.
Let me give you an idea of the scale. To pay someone and give that person a jerry can of kerosene to burn 1 hectare of forest costs about 6 Singapore dollars. If you pay a team of contractors to use chainsaws to cut forests, tractors and bulldozers to clear the logs, and then plow the ground, it'll cost you thousands of dollars more. Between $6 and thousands of dollars. That is the profit motive. That is where the source of the haze lies. Through our purchasing decisions, we can punish businesses that undertake illegal burning and reward those who adopt sustainable practices.
Some MPs asked for more information on the companies responsible for the haze. Dr. Balakrishnan says he does not have any evidence or information on any Singapore-linked company. He also addressed speculations that government investment arm Temasek Holdings had invested in some companies responsible for the haze.
Temasek invested in a company called Cargill. And I made discreet inquiries. Cargill's plantations were all in the south of Sumatra. There was no satellite hotspot in that area. But that wasn't enough. I'll let you in on a little secret. Temasek actually sent executives to go and visit the ground, took photographs of nice, beautiful blue skies to show me that this was not happening, that there are companies worth investing in who are doing the right thing and behaving responsibly.
Dr. Balakrishnan also addressed concerns raised over the accuracy of PSI readings. He said the government is committed to giving accurate information and the PSI system is undergoing a transition. The plan is to give a 24-hour advisory so that Singaporeans can plan ahead with their activities.
On the PSI readings, there were quite a lot of suggestions from residents that to give hourly PSI readings.
The point is, any number that NEA publishes, by definition, will always be an average across space and time. And I'll tell you honestly, I cannot give you a precise estimate of the haze outside your particular window. I just want to emphasize again, there's no reason for us to give misleading data. This is the way we will operate from now on. Continue to provide data which is internationally comparable, which gives you an index of risk. Continue to watch short-term trends, and the moment that anything changes for the better or for worse, we will keep Singaporeans informed. So I give you that assurance that we will be accurate, we'll be transparent, and we will be practical.
As for the Health Ministry's role in dealing with the haze, Minister Gan Kim Yong says the impact of the haze on the health system has been manageable so far. During the 1 week when the haze was at its most severe, polyclinics saw a 16.5% increase in related conditions like asthma and conjunctivitis. However, hospitals' A&E departments did not see any significant increase. Mr. Gan emphasised that the Health Ministry has put in place plans to ensure Singapore is haze-ready for the long term. This includes contingency plans to protect patients if the haze worsens, increase bed capacity and rebuilding stockpile of N95 masks. Another scheme is where low-income and other eligible patients pay $10 at selected clinics for respiratory problems or conjunctivitis.
I think Dr. Vivian has reminded us all that dry season is not yet over, so we have to remain vigilant and to be well prepared. So for the time being, the scheme will still remain in place. We'll review again at the end of the dry season to see whether it is necessary to continue, whether we will reintroduce it next year or we could refine the scheme to make it a better scheme.
Senior Minister of State Li Xian says the government did not invoke the Control of Essential Supplies Act during the haze crisis because the PSI spike to unhealthy levels was over a relatively short period. The act gives the government the power to control and ration the sale of any essential items during a crisis. The N95 masks saw a sudden surge in demand when the haze hit last month, and this led to a surge in prices as well.
My question is whether MTI will consider a set of advisories on what would be a fair price for certain essential items in cases of emergencies.
I think some of the dislocation in supply is not so much that the wholesaler or the main storehouse do not have the mask. It's, purely logistics because they couldn't get the resupply run fast enough several times a day to reach their retailers, to their outlets, store outlets. So I think these are all lessons for learning, and going forward, we would consider the member's suggestion.
Acting Minister Lawrence Wong says the goal for the Community, Culture and Youth Ministry is to ensure national athletes can continue training without compromising their health and safety. When the haze was at its worst, the national football and volleyball teams switched to indoor training facilities. For the Southeast Asian Games in June 2015, Mr. Wong said the organising committee is working out haze contingency plans.
We cannot predict or say for certain what will happen in 2015, but we will certainly do whatever we can to engage our neighbours and manage the issue upstream.
The haze problem also had to be tackled online. Communications and Information Minister Dr. Yaacob Ibrahim said the crisis saw many rumours and false information cause unnecessary anxiety to the public. For example, an unknown person had accused Tan Tock Seng Hospital of jacking up the price of N95 masks to profit from the crisis. Dr. Yaacob said the impact of such rumours today is great, reaching more people than they did in the past. He said the government had to declare such rumours false before they took root and caused further harm. This was done through the haze microsite. Dr. Yaacob said the Media Literacy Council has a difficult task ahead of educating the public to build a responsible and safe online environment.
The idea of an Internet Code of Conduct was rejected by prominent members of the online community, like Ravi Philemon, and even the formation of the MLC was greeted with skepticism. Yet, Madam, when public anxiety was highest during the days when the haze was its worst, where were these prominent members of the online community who believed the Internet should be left alone? Were they helping to clarify and reject online rumours, or were they helping to spread them or even create them?
Parliament also debated the new licensing framework for online news sites. Communications and Information Minister Dr. Yaacob Ibrahim says fears that the new framework will stifle internet freedom are unfounded. He said the sites fall under the same content standards as the existing class licensing scheme and are meant to safeguard racial and religious harmony, public order, as well as good taste and decency. Currently, there are 10 sites that have been identified for individual licensing. Dr. Yaacob also stressed there are only 2 additional requirements which will be imposed on licensees. That is, to provide a $50,000 performance bond and 24 hours to take down content which is in breach of content standards.
Another concern expressed by sites not identified for individual licensing is that it has a chilling effect on their activities. I think, Madam, this is far-fetched. In any case, I don't think they are so easily chilled. I have already explained that the MDA will set a reasonable performance bond commensurate with the financial position of a future licensee. The intention is not to prevent the site from operating under a license. On the contrary, the intent is to allow a qualifying site to continue to operate under an individual license.
Dr. Yaacob said the 10 potential licensees were informed of the new licensing framework before it was introduced. He said MDA's engagement with them on the exact terms of the license is ongoing. Dr. Yaacob also addressed questions as to why there was no wider public consultation before the new rules were announced.
The licensing framework only applies to a small number of news sites and does not affect the overwhelming majority of internet content providers. Besides, content standards have remained unchanged, and the license will not impact the public in general. So therefore, when implementing the framework, we did not feel there was a need for wider public consultation before the licensing framework was announced. Nevertheless, Madam, we will continue to engage stakeholder groups on this issue to allay any concerns that they may have.
Several MPs also asked whether the new licensing rules will affect Singapore's international reputation.
My last question refers to the Asian Internet Coalition's letter to the Ministry to register its concerns on behalf of Yahoo, Google, Facebook and eBay. And I note that this happened even after the group has met and sought clarification with the Ministry. So has this affected, or will this affect the long-term reputation of Singapore as an international, as a pro-business environment, including our aspiration to be a data hosting hub?
Like the member, I'm also puzzled as to why they issued that statement, even though we have clarified. But I'd like to assure the House and members of the public that we don't think in any way this will affect the international reputation of Singapore, because this has nothing to do with doing business in Singapore. It is about holding certain websites to a higher level of responsibility.
The new licensing framework was also the subject of an adjournment motion raised by non-constituency member Lina Chiam. In response, Dr. Yaacob again stressed that the individual licensing of online news sites is meant to ensure a certain standard of responsibility among news providers, and it's not a departure from the light touch approach the government has adopted for the internet. He said the content standards are no different from existing ones under the class license and Internet Code of Practice. Therefore, there's no cause for concern that individual licensing of news sites will stifle internet freedom.
It is because of the responsibility news providers have to our society that we have adopted an individual licensing framework for traditional news platforms. And this is also the reason for extending a similar framework to online news sites for greater consistency. I'm confident that over time, members will be convinced that this new licensing framework serves the interests of our society and will be implemented in a manner in keeping with the spirit of the light touch approach, and that the government has not deviated from this broad stance.
Two bills were introduced in Parliament today. Changes are being proposed under the Act to suppress the financing of terrorism and penalties involved. Another bill seeks to introduce laws to clarify the status of children conceived through assisted reproduction technologies, or ART. The laws will address who the legal parents of the child should be if the wrong sperm, egg or embryo was used. Parliament will sit again tomorrow. Good night.